several of them in attendance today. My name is Shane Reardon, and I'm one of the members of the St. George's Environmental Stewardship Committee. And it is my honor and privilege to introduce our guest speakers today. In recognition of Rogation Sunday, St. George's is pleased to welcome Rabbi Devorah Lynn and Dr. Fred Lipschultz to speak about connecting science and climate change with Scripture, and to discuss the impact that we can have on climate change both individually and as a community. And without further ado, why don't I just turn it over to you guys, give you guys the floor, let you get going. Yeah, give you some more time. Okay. All right, great. Thank you so much.
Fred Lipschultz.
That much better. All right, and this is going to be our first time actually at the pulpit together, I think. I'm not sure who the lead bill and who the highlight act is here, but I will be going first. I'm the warm-up band, exactly. So let me just say, I work on climate change for the federal government. I'm in the work with the President's Climate Advisor and Science Advisor, supporting all of the federal agencies that think about climate research. So I'm not a policy person. I'm on the research side. So what I'd like to do today is turn on my talk here first. Hopefully that's going to be big enough for everybody. And just start out with a little primer on what we mean when we talk about climate change, because a lot of terms get thrown out, so I thought it would be good to have a simple visual. And I like this one because it talks about the Earth as a system. So we often hear bits and pieces, and the attempt here is to take you from this side where we have all of the countries, the main emitters of CO2 and climate active gases, and so that is being pumped into this part of the system here where we talk about emissions. So how much all the countries are putting up as emissions from the ground, from people, and then it goes into here where there's the amount of CO2 in our atmosphere and the amount of methane. So if you follow these pipes of the plumbing of our system of the planet, these two reservoirs are the things that we talk about when we talk about global warming gases. And they're the things then, if you follow this, for instance here, the pipe takes us over and you can see it increases our surface temperature. So these gases actually are helping to capture light and energy, and it's heating up our planet's surface. The other thing that happens is if you follow this pipe around, it turns out that the CO2 also dissolves into the ocean, and that causes the other global change problem, which is the oceans are acidifying. And that's affecting all the life inside the ocean. And so that's this area down here. And then when you follow over here for the surface temperature and you look to see what happens as you follow the plumbing of our planetary system, some of the heat that is being captured then by these gases in our atmosphere is transferred to the ocean. The other thing that happens is that heat is also being transferred to our glacial systems in Greenland, Antarctica, and in the Arctic sea ice, and they're all melting. So what happens is you get both the melting of that fresh water, but also the heat in the ocean, and both of those contribute to changing the level of the ocean. So the sea level is rising. So if you've been to places like Norfolk lately, or Charleston or Miami, they'll all tell you how much they're being impacted by sea level rising, water in places on their streets that they've never seen it before. Oh, thank you. So let me just show you this. And in fact, if you click on that, this is a map. No, oh, it's not going live. Okay, I had that set up on my computer. It'll go right to the internet. But so this is, oh, maybe it'll do it. So this is a map showing that allows you, so there's some handouts that give you some resources, so all of these different graphics that I'll show you can look at copies yourself and then play with it. And then just scroll down a little bit. There. And then you can be part of my act here. So this graphic actually shows the U.S., and you can zoom in on any part of it online, and you can move from today into the future, and you can shift between, if we continue doing what we're doing today by putting all that CO2 and methane into the atmosphere, if you continue to do that, we call that the high emissions pathway for humanity, as opposed to doing a lot to prevent all of that CO2 and other gases from going up into the atmosphere and warming. So if you go ahead and slide that, Shane, back and forth. Can you slide that? Just grab that middle and slide it to the left now. Can't hardly see any difference. Now move the temperature forward into the future. Move the bottom one into the future. Just keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. And so when you look out, not at our time, but at our children's time, 2050, or our grandchildren's time, 2080, you see that the temperature has gotten considerably hotter across the entire United States. So those are projections of where we think the temperature will increase as we move forward. And we can look at several things on this same website if you're interested, and it's on that list that I've handed out for things like precipitation and other kinds of things. Next slide. Yeah. And the other place that I would send you to learn more about the impacts on the United States is a report that I worked on for several years, which is online, looks like this. It's called Climate Change Impacts of the United States. It's a report that we have to prepare by law and present to Congress every 4 years that details exactly how it is that we think that the climate is going to affect the United States moving into the future, how much we understand, how confident we are in the kinds of things that we can do to change that. So if you go in the report, you can explore all kinds of things about it online, which we can do real quickly maybe. And I can just show you a little bit the full report. See how fast your internet is. And so, oh, it's not coming up on the full screen here. Let me just see. Yeah, I think so. So here you can see we've set this up. This is actually interesting. It's the first government report like this that was done completely online. So no longer are we just looking at a book, but you can use this website to explore and search for everything online. You can download the report if you want to look at chapters, or you can just use this and go find out information about all the different regions of the country. So we have 8 different regions. We have information about many of our economic sectors and sections on all sorts of other issues, including frequently asked questions about climate that can help you explore and learn more about the issue. Next slide. So in the report, there's 3 main messages that we wanted to convey to everybody. First is that there's a tremendous amount of evidence all across the country about these impacts that are happening now. This is not something that is going to be just in our children's time or our grandchildren's time, but is actually impacting the U.S. currently, that everyone's feeling the effects of extreme weather, sea level rise, heat waves, and that there are a lot of opportunities in this change, this alteration of our climate that we're undergoing for preparing for the future. So it's not just something that's going to impact us. There are lots of things that we can do. Next. Another report that we just came out with a couple of weeks ago, which is looking at climate change impacts on human health. So in this report, again, is online. You can explore on your own. And learn more about topics, how it's impacting things like the movement of Lyme disease, asthma, effects of heat waves, and many other things that's been put together by several of the agencies in the government to try to understand just how much we know and where we're going. Next slide. There's another report out that's quite interesting that's from the business sector. So the businesses are also taking this on board. So this is called the Risky Business Report, an organization. And so it's put together by Michael Bloomberg and Hank Paulson and Tom Steyer, all well-known businessmen. And they put together a report that lays out how much these things are going to impact our economy and the kinds of things that they think we can do about it. So another resource that's on your handout. Next one. So there's been a lot said about by people who think this is all a hoax. So that's what this cartoon is about, talking about at a climate summit, what if it is a big hoax? I think this community has moved well beyond thinking it's a hoax now. In fact, there was a vote in the Senate last year that basically voted, I think it was 99-1, that the climate is being altered. And so I think they've moved on to how much do we really know, and is it worth changing what we're doing, instead of thinking that it's a hoax. But the point I want to make here in it, and that is made very well in this cartoon, is that these are the opportunities that we see in this, in shifting from the kinds of ways we currently produce energy that are causing these problems to something that will not only avoid altering the climate, but will also give us a better quality of life than we have now. Next one. This is another aspect of it. I picked this one because it had a nice religious theme. Since I was going to leave that to the rabbi to cover most of it, I thought I'd get a little bit in. So here's Noah down here floating along today. And he's saying, sure, I was warned, but the remedy sounded difficult. So that, I think, is more where we are now. And then I love, this is one of the Tolls ones, little cartoon down here. The person at the bottom says, he has gathered instead two of every excuse. And so I think that's really where we are. And we have to move beyond just coming up with excuses. And I think those of you who've been around a while can think of all the times that we've had things that industry and business has said, we can't do these things, we have lots of excuses, cost us this, jobs, money, yet we still have cars, for instance, that have much higher gas mileage. That was going to bankrupt the industry, and many other examples where we've moved on successfully in America to improve our environment at the same time as doing good for the planet. Next one. This is my moving beyond fire and brimstone. A lot of times we get caught up in all of the fact that the U.S. looked all that red and hot. So this is gay. Here, I couldn't change it, maybe Joe, and they're saying, repent, reuse, recycle, lest ye burn, and everyone's bowing down here to praise the globe. We're not really thinking that I'm not going to spend any time on this. I think it's the wrong message. I think we should be shifting more to the opportunities. And I think now I'm just going to do some talking before we end. That'll be the last slide before I turn it over to the rabbi who's disappeared on me. Where is she?
Back here.
Back there. Oh, how could I ever lose you after all these years? Always in my sight. So rather than talking about fire and brimstone or what we might call the drought, the health issues from climate alteration, let's just see what kinds of things are on the horizon for harbingers of hope and change. And so the central problem of this climate alteration that we have is really that we need to leave the carbon that we're now emitting into the atmosphere from that first light in the ground. And so we need to come up with ways to generate energy and to distribute that power around the economy and around to people around the world so that they can continue to have a quality of lifestyle. That's really the big challenge. We need to dramatically alter how we currently generate energy, and we're addicted to these fossil fuels as an easy and simple way that has built up over the last 100 years. So the question is, can we do this? And I think there are several possible paths into the future, moving us from this what we have now, which is a very central distribution of power, to one that's much more distributed, much more one that we're not seeing the kinds of economic impacts that we have from the energy industry, from having to go to war to keep our energy sources fixed, to coal mining in the effects of that, and all the other health issues, to something where we have a much more distributed system. So this isn't a new idea. For instance, in Israel, most of the homes have solar hot water heaters on their roofs, and they are expecting to generate 10% of their energy from renewable sources by 2020. In India, the Prime Minister, Modi, has actually written a book on climate change. You can get it on Amazon. And he's announced that they are going to be relying on supplying 400 million Indians with solar energy in the next few decades. So some big commitments. Bangladesh, not exactly a leader in these areas, is actually installing 2 rooftop solar systems every minute. It's the leading installer and most rapidly growing market for solar in the world. In the U.S., 49% of the new generating capacity in 2012 came from renewables, so we're building that into our system. And that the cost of energy from photovoltaic, from solar cells, has been dropping dramatically, and it's now on a par with energy generation from other sources. So we have ways that we can generate power from that. We also have wind energy, and the costs of that have dropped 43% since 2009. It's now cheaper to do that than to add more coal capacity. We've installed 5-fold more wind energy generation since 2006. So again, the question is, can we do this and replace this in the whole economy? And it's interesting that if you go back to the 1920s, when they first invented solar wind power and were putting it on farms all through the Midwest, if we put in the same number and built them out at the same rate as people in the U.S. did in the 1920s, if we did that today with modern generating, we could pretty much solve most of our energy generation problem. So it's been done. One of the things that, again, when you look back in the past, for instance, we take for granted our waste and water system distribution system. And in reality, back when that was proposed as something that we needed to do in our cities, and that's in the 1850s, people said the exact same things that we hear today. So I'll read you a quote from The Economist magazine in 1848. "Suffering and evil are nature's admonitions. They cannot be gotten rid of. The impatient attempts of benevolence to banish them from a world by legislation before benevolence has learned their object and their end," meaning having legislation forcing us to do things and we don't know what the implications are going to be. "It's always been more productive of evil than of good." So they're saying basically, yeah, we don't want to have legislation just like we have today. The other thing in this article in The Economist is they talk about the fact that changing the way they did sewage in the cities in those days, the night haulers, the people who would haul it out of the city out to the farmers, were going to lose jobs. The farmers, how were they going to get what they needed? Who was going to pay for it? How were they going to govern it? All of these things were the same issues we hear today about all of these issues, especially for climate change. So the question is, can we do this fast enough? And I say that there's no problem. Today we think nothing of paying our sewage fee and our water fees. Everyone expects this of us, of government. And I think that's basically the message, that we can do it. We can do it soon. We just have to do it soon. And that there are pathways forward if we invest properly in renewable fuels. It's interesting, I was just actually reading this morning an article by Bill Gates where he's investing along with 20 other billionaires in a clean energy fund, and was pointing out that the energy industry actually invests about 0.2% of their revenues in research on new energy sources. And in fact, if you're in IT or in pharmaceuticals, it's more like 15 to 20% of their revenues towards new products. And that most of the investment that the fossil fuel energy that we've let them do is actually from government. So all of the issues of fracking, that was developed by government, solar development, all government funding. And so we need to change the model, and he's investing in those things for the future. And I'll leave you with this website, which we won't go to, but it's a website called the Climate Resilience Toolkit, and it's put together by colleagues of mine with help from my office and me working specifically on the climate parts of this to give you all tools and see exactly how you can engage what your neighbors are doing. There's lots of interesting case studies divided up by different kinds of interests, different areas of the country where you can see what people are doing, what the challenges are, and then the tools to start to plan for the future. So I'll leave it there and hand it over to my esteemed colleague. I think we'll do questions at the end to make sure that we.
Did everyone get a copy of the resource list?
Or do we need more?
Do we need more?
There's extras here.
Nick, thank you for passing those out. I lost track of them. Thank you.
Okay, over to you. See, and I did actually pretty well for a scientist. I didn't put up a single graph, huh? That's amazing.
I made sure he didn't do that. So we're handing out a sheet that's back to back. I'm Devorah Lynn. I was the rabbi at Beth Shalom Temple up on, what is it, 133. Is it 133? For 6 years. And as Fred said, this is our first team effort doing the two sides, science and spirituality of climate change. So I'm looking forward to going around the country. We could, be a team, we'll act. So I'm going to go. I handed out a lot of text because when I asked Gay if I could come with Fred to talk, I said I would do some text, some scripture, some Torah, and she was like so excited. But I'm going to go through these very fast because I've really changed my perspective on this. So many of these you are familiar with. They are from the Hebrew Bible. So Genesis, God blesses creation, and then at the end, it says something I find troubling. Be fruitful and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds, heavens, everything living that moves on the earth. And usually Hebrew is very malleable. And usually there are 3 definitions for every Hebrew word. But unfortunately, the word chavash and the word radah, which are the subordinate and dominate, there really isn't any other definition for them. So they are very strong domination words. So I can't really talk this away about our relationship with the earth. It is softened a bit in Genesis 2 that we should keep and guard the garden. We see in the Psalms the earth is the Lord's, everything in it, the fullness thereof. We have prohibitions against species, for species preservation. There are these 2 very specific rules about if you come across a bird's nest, you should not take the bird and the eggs. You're taking the entire generations of that species. You should not slaughter a calf and its mother on the same day. These are very laser-like things. And there are a few other big concepts. Bal tashchit, which is almost impossible to pronounce, means to not destroy. It's particularly applied during war. Don't destroy fruit trees. The other trees, okay, you can tear those down, but don't destroy the fruit trees. The sabbatical year, everybody loves to talk about that it's crop rotation, but it's that in the 7th year, everybody stops growing, and you have to have faith that you will have enough to eat. And also our kosher laws, our kashrut, also has a reverence for food and where it comes from and the connections, and we bless our food before we eat it in very specific ways. And so there's a lot of food consciousness, but that too has gotten out of hand with rules and sort of an obsession with details as opposed to looking at the bigger picture of interconnection. There are some later beautiful writings about the earth, post-biblical. This one is from Genesis Rabbi, which is Midrash. It's around 200, it's a long span of time, but around 200, 300, even those things that you may regard as completely superfluous to creation, such as fleas, gnats, flies, they were included in creation, and God's purpose is to carry through everything. It is carried through everything, even though through a snake, a scorpion, a gnat, and a frog. And then also in another Midrash are legends that are written to help us understand and comment on the Torah. Look at my works, see how beautiful they are, how excellent. For your sake I created them all, because we are the conscious being. We notice. See to it that you do not despoil and destroy my world. For if you do, there will be no one else to repair it. In other words, I guess the cockroaches that are going to take over, they're not going to repair it. And a wonderful and beloved Israeli leader, Rav Abraham Yitzhak Kook, as you can see, quite modern, 20th century, said, if you are amazed at how it is possible to speak, hear, smell, touch, see, understand, and feel all of our senses, if you are amazed at being able to feel nature and in all of our senses, tell your soul that all living things collectively confer upon you the fullness of your experience. Not the least speck of existence is superfluous. Everything is needed and everything serves its purpose. You are present within everything that is beneath you, and your being is bound up with all that transcends you. I think in the last decade or two, we have found out that we have all these things living in us, even on our eyelashes. And at first, I think it grossed people out, but I hope you're getting used to it, that these things are extremely important, and they keep us healthy, and they colonize us, really, and they're using us, but we're using them as well. So we are all incredibly interconnected. Let's see, do I have the second paragraph of the Shema? Is that on the back? We turn that over. Okay, so every day we do prayers 3 times a day, and every day we say this prayer that I am rather upset that I'm a reformly ordained rabbi, and they took it out of our prayer book, and they made a new prayer book, and they added the 3rd paragraph back in, but they did not add the 2nd paragraph because of theological, I wish I had been at the committee meetings, theological dogma reasons. But this is a prayer that Jews say, and I have bolded, let me read what is bolded. And it shall come to pass, if you diligently hearken to my commandments, which I command you today, I will give you the rain of your land in its due season, the early rain, the late rain, and you shall gather your grain, your wine, your oil. I will give grass in your fields for the cattle. You shall eat and be satisfied. Take heed, lest your heart be led astray. You turn away, worship alien gods, and bow down to them, i.e., money, consumption. God's anger will be inflamed against you, and he will stop up the heavens so that there's no rain and the earth not yield its produce, and you will swiftly perish from the good land that God's giving you. And the word for stopped up is actually the same word for constipated, which I find very graphic for Californians in particular at this point with the drought. In order that your days be multiplied and the days of your children upon the land that God vowed to your fathers to give them for as long as the heavens are above the earth. So I said I have a change of heart, that I'm a real text lover. I love to take text, but honestly, the texts on climate change, I can find dozens of texts on capital punishment, immigration, guns even. But climate and change and nature are a little bit sparse and a little bit unsatisfying, a lot unsatisfying. And I think it may be because biblical people were so tied to the land. Israelis are so tied to the land and so aware of weather and rain and sun. It actually really surprises me that Israel, 10% is going to be solar. I mean, it doesn't even make sense, except we were there for 3 weeks over the winter, and we found out that the government there is pro-oil, right? It's nuts, and they had to fight to change to being pro-solar, even though everyone, I would say everyone, has a solar water heater on their roof. So, but the biblical people are so tied to the land, they knew intimately what would happen if things got out of balance. And so, I really think we are at a point, hopefully we are at a point that we're not, as you say, we're not really discussing whether this is happening. It is happening. The evidence is completely overwhelming. The evidence that we have an effect on it is completely overwhelming. We can argue about that later over coffee. But it's very nice to read and study and watch PBS specials and listen to NPR. But what is really going to be important in the coming years is practice. That we really have to look at the way we live every moment, every day, every week, and practice a mindfulness about climate change. How many of you can say you have a spiritual practice? Church on Sunday, it counts, but it's just Sunday, right? How many of you have a spiritual practice? Maybe once a day, a couple of times a week. Okay. How many of you go to the gym on a religious basis? There you go. Okay. We're going to have to do these things. Walk the dog, you got to do that, right? Religiously. That's what I'm talking about, is that we are going to have a mindfulness about this that is a daily practice. So I want to look at 2 Jewish spiritual practices that have implications for climate change. So that's on the other side where it says practice, practice, practice. The first one is Hanukkah. Oh, I meant to bring Hanukkah menorah to remind you, in case, if you're not a Hanukkah observer, I know you have a competing holiday about the same time. And so I want to let you just sort of borrow it for a little bit. And we're not at Hanukkah time, we're at Passover. We just finished Passover. But Hanukkah, one of my teachers, Rabbi Arthur Waskow from Philadelphia, a real rebel, said, we have a holiday called Tu B'Shvat in February that is our Arbor Day. It's about the trees. We glorify the trees and what a miraculous creation they are. We have Sukkot, which is when we build these little goofy booths and the sky is open. We can see the stars and we go out and we kind of camp out in them for a week. It's our final harvest holiday. And we think of that as our kind of Earth Day, or, get out in the wilderness, go camping, that kind of thing. And, but Rabbi Waskow was sitting under a tree and he was saying, oh God, I really wish there was a holiday that talks about the preservation of oil. Like oil and carbon is such a problem with global climate change, and he calls it global scorching because he thinks global warming was too gentle and nice, kind and gentle. And he says, I wish there was a holiday about preserving oil. And then he goes, Hanukkah. The whole idea of, the honest idea about Hanukkah is that we had a very big military victory over an enemy. I forget, they're Greco-Assyrians, I think, Greco-Assyrians, before the year 0, a couple hundred years, and It's not in the Bible. It's not in our Bible. It's in yours, the book of the Maccabees, because it was too late happening for us. But later we developed a legend that was a diversion from people who didn't like us, that we would get too uppity if we said that we had this huge guerrilla warfare against an army that had tanks that were really elephants, elephant tanks, and that we won. So we have this legend that says that when we got back to the temple, when we took back the temple in Jerusalem after a year of being held by the pagans, we had to clean it out, and we had to light the menorah, the candelabra, which has 7 candles, one for every day. We had to relight that with holy oil. They're not with candles, they do it with oil. We had to relight that with sanctified holy oil, and it took 8 days or so to sanctify oil. And they only found enough sanctified oil in 1 cruse of oil. They always call it a cruse, a bottle of oil. And miracle of miracles, it lasted 8 days. This one, that was meant for 1 day. So that is an incredible miracle. That is an 87% reduction or expansion in the use of 1 day's oil. That is quite a goal. If we could conserve energy, water, all the things that we normally consume by 87%. Fred, is there something, you talked about something that already we're headed towards, wind power. We're headed towards a huge expansion. If we could use that as our goal, 1 to 8 would be quite amazing. So it becomes the ultimate conservation holiday, Hanukkah. The second thing that I think is a Jewish gift to the world is Shabbat, the Sabbath. And I mean, this was an incredibly radical idea. 1 in 7 days you take off. God takes off. If God can take off from creation, why can't we? And I like the term that it's willful inactivity. It's not that you just do nothing. It's that you willfully do nothing. That you have to really be mindful and intentional about Shabbat. Now, in the Orthodox world, they are obsessively intentional about it, I have to say. That they spend in fact, the days of the week are not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The days of the week are Yom Rishon, the first day to Shabbat, that's Sunday. The second day to Shabbat, Monday. The third day to Shabbat, where am I? Tuesday. Fourth day, Wednesday. So that you know how many days you have to prepare to rest. And you have to cook in advance, and you have to make sure that you don't tear toilet paper, believe it or not. You use Kleenex instead. You have to make sure that everything is ready so that you are not expending energy, electrical energy over Shabbat. And let's read what it says in Exodus about it. That there are 39 forbidden forms of work on the Sabbath that come out of the temple building. But remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. You can't ask other people to do the work for you. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock even, any foreigners living among you. In 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that's in them, and rested on the 7th day. And the word for rested, vayinafash, it means refreshed, and was refreshed. It's a beautiful word. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So if God takes a day off, why can't we? Don't you think God is a bit busy? if there are any students in here in the room, I know of one, they're going to tell you that you should not demand that they do their homework on the Sabbath if you decide to do this. So we have a funny midrash that I really like. It said, when the Jewish people, so why do we do this Shabbat thing, this willful inactivity? It comes directly out of the concept of God creating the universe and the exodus from Egypt, not being slaves anymore. Slaves do not have a say on when they have a day off. They don't get a day off. They can't ask questions. So as free people, we have the ability to say, I'm going to take this day off, and I'm going to take this day off and dedicate it to something higher than going shopping, than doing errands, than all the things we distract ourselves with. The Midrash says, Midrash legends, when the Jewish people were gathered at Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, God told them that heaven would be their reward for keeping the commandments. And the Jews asked God, how do we know heaven's so great? How about a free sample to see if it's worthwhile? Apparently Jews have always been astute business people. And God wasn't upset at this request. He knew that heaven is where we experience the pure and unadulterated pleasure of the infinite God. So he said, no problem, I'll send you a sample of heaven, Shabbat. Thus the sages say, Shabbat is a taste of heaven on earth. If heaven is pure spirituality, then Shabbat is a taste of that experience. So we have Hanukkah, which is an 87% decrease in use, and Shabbat is 14%. It's 14% of the week. So it's a kind of practice towards this goal of 80%. And how can we, by denying ourselves, can this be elevating? So I want to talk about how that stopping can be so elevating. And there are the 39 forbidden things, which you're not going to like this, include tilling fields, gardening, which include baking, cooking, which includes carrying things even. So it's a kind of long list. And these may be some of the things that you absolutely love doing, but you're not supposed to be creating or destroying. And, you know, the 24/7 thing that we created with, you know, blue laws were a problem for us because our Shabbat was different. But I find the 24/7 open thing really very a temptation, a great temptation and problematic. So we see Shabbat as a portent of the world to come, of paradise. And you have to try it to really see it. The way I started really observing Shabbat, I did it until noon. I had a lovely Shabbat dinner the night before on Friday when it starts for us at sunset, and then I wouldn't do anything not Shabbatish until noon. And then I kept extending it. And this is when we had children, so somehow the kids, I think we walked the kids to soccer, or somehow they got there, whatever. And I just, but we didn't let them watch television. We turned off we only had television. We turned off our electronics, and that is a huge beginning. Someone, Carrie, told me there's an app. I forgot what it's called, a Sabbath app that turns your phone red on the Sabbath to remind you should take one day away from your technical stuff. So I have our prayer here that tells you that it's about Exodus and creation. So if we practice one day of conserving, of relaxing our consumption, we can take this, we can carry it into the week. And perhaps soon we will be able to reduce our consumption by a major amount. So it's getting late, but many people are saying that perhaps this crisis in the climate is God's way of getting all religions to put down their weapons and work together. I think we've been working on a lot of interfaith things in the last couple of decades, and that's going to pay off. And perhaps this is God's way to get science and religion to finally work together. So those two things have a good purpose. I do have a prayer. I'll read it quickly. Lord our God, God of our ancestors, who separated light from the darkness. It's not on your page. Upper waters from lower waters and seas from land, who appears in the whirlwind, the burning bush, and strangers standing at an open tent, who freed us from Egypt, slavery, who thundered at Sinai. We are awestruck. Help us remember. God, we've kind of messed things up. We didn't mean to. It was science and progress, electricity and cars and plastic. Plastic is so amazing, God. It's so useful. But now we've upset the balance of your creation, this beautiful, wildly diverse, interconnected, pulsing, breathing planet full of life. We didn't mean to. We have to act. We have to act fast. We can do it. It's going to take work. And we're going to have to work together, something we haven't done. Give us strength, imagination, hope. Help us meet new challenges with hearts that are open for this little blue planet. Gift of water and breath and life amazing. Thank you, God. Please guide us as we seek to act. Help us mend our ways, heal, return, and repair soon. And let us all say, Amen. So,
Five more minutes than we normally